Captain Jake Morrison had seen a lot of weird stuff in his 15 years as humanity's chief diplomatic liaison, but nothing quite prepared him for walking into the Galactic Council chambers and finding 300 alien representatives sobbing. Well, the ones who had tear ducts were sobbing. The crystalline hegemony was making this horrible scraping sound that probably counted as crying, and the gaseous collective had turned a particularly depressing shade of purple. Okay, what fresh hell is this? Jake muttered under his breath, adjusting his collar as he made his way to the human delegation's seats. The starship Good Intentions had just dropped out of hyperspace an hour ago, and already he was regretting not staying in bed. Counselor Prime Thexus, a towering blue-skinned alien with way too many eyes, called the emergency session to order. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," she announced, her voice carrying that special kind of solemnity reserved for truly catastrophic news. "We face an unprecedented crisis. The Flufari homeworld has gone silent." Jake raised an eyebrow. The Flufari were basically the galaxy's equivalent of teddy bears that had evolved opposable thumbs and space travel. Cute, harmless, and universally beloved. Their entire culture revolved around being aggressively wholesome. "Our reconnaissance teams have confirmed our worst fears," Thexus continued, dabbing at her primary eyes with a tissue the size of a beach towel. "The adult Flufari population has completely vanished. Gone. Disappeared without a trace." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Jake felt his stomach drop. However, Thexus raised a hand for silence. "Their cubs remain. Thousands upon thousands of orphaned Flufari younglings, ranging in age from newborns to adolescents. They are alone, frightened, and in desperate need of care." The chamber erupted in what Jake could only describe as the most elaborate display of excuse-making he'd ever witnessed. The Vorthan Empire suddenly discovered urgent business in the Andromeda Galaxy. The Silicon Syndicate claimed their biology was incompatible with mammalian life forms. The Hive Mind Collective insisted they were too busy achieving enlightenment to deal with children. Jake watched this parade of cosmic responsibility dodging with growing incredulity. These were the same species that had spent decades lecturing humans about their moral shortcomings and primitive emotional responses. "This is ridiculous," he said, standing up. The entire chamber fell silent, 300 pairs of various optical organs turning toward him. "You're telling me that none of you, not a single one, can take care of some kids?" Counselor Vrex of the Reptilian Commonwealth, a smug lizard-like creature with an attitude problem, slithered forward. "The matter is far more complex than your simple human mind can grasp, Captain Morrison. These aren't just some kids. They're an entirely different species with unique biological and cultural requirements." "Right," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I suppose none of your super-advanced civilizations have figured out basic child care yet?" The chamber buzzed with indignant alien chatter, but Jake wasn't done. "You know what? Fine. Humanity volunteers. We'll take them. All of them." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop, assuming pins made sound in the vacuum of space, which they didn't, but Jake was pretty sure everyone got the metaphor. Counselor Prime Thexus blinked all 6 of her eyes in sequence. "I'm sorry, did you just say—" "We'll take the cubs," Jake repeated, crossing his arms. "Every last one of them. Ship them to human space and we'll figure it out." The chamber exploded into chaos. Aliens were shouting, chirping, buzzing, and making whatever sounds their species used to express complete and utter shock. Through it all, Jake stood there with a satisfied grin, already mentally composing his report back to Earth Command. Sure, humanity had just volunteered to adopt thousands of alien orphans without consulting anyone in authority, but honestly, after watching the galaxy's supposedly superior civilizations collectively fail at basic decency, it felt like the most human thing they could possibly do. Besides, how hard could it be? Famous last words, as it turned out. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself sitting across from Counselor Vrex in what had to be the galaxy's most depressing conference room. The walls were beige, the lighting was harsh, and the furniture seemed specifically designed to make anyone with a spine thoroughly miserable. "Now then," Vrex said, consulting a tablet that was roughly the size of a small refrigerator, "we must ensure that humanity meets the galactic adoption standards before we can proceed." He looked up at Jake with the kind of smile that suggested he was about to enjoy this way too much. "After all, we can't simply hand over thousands of vulnerable younglings to just anyone." "Right," Jake said slowly, "because you were all so concerned about their welfare 5 minutes ago." Vrex's smile widened, revealing way too many teeth. The Galactic Adoption Committee has prepared a comprehensive evaluation process. You'll need to demonstrate competency in 17 different categories of interspecies childcare. Jake accepted the datapad Vrex slid across the table and immediately regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. Telepathic lullaby certification? Emotional temperature regulation? What the hell is quantum naptime theory? Oh, that's a fascinating subject, Vrex said, practically purring with satisfaction. It involves maintaining the proper balance of dream state frequencies, while accounting for multi-dimensional sleep cycles. The Ethereal Collective pioneered the technique over 3,000 years ago. The Ethereal Collective doesn't sleep, Jake pointed out. They're made of pure energy. Irrelevant. Vrex waved a clawed hand dismissively. The standards are the standards. Jake scrolled through more requirements, each one more ridiculous than the last. Pheromone-based communication fluency? Metabolic harmony assessment? Wait a minute. He looked up sharply. This says we need to demonstrate proficiency in 73 different forms of nonverbal discipline techniques. Some of these species don't even have children anymore. The committee felt it was important to be thorough. The committee felt it was important to make this impossible, Jake shot back. Let me guess, you're hoping we'll give up and go away so you don't have to deal with the guilt of letting thousands of kids suffer? Rex's expression didn't change, but his tail twitched. The Galactic Council merely wishes to ensure the Flafari younglings receive proper care. Jake was about to deliver a response that would probably get him kicked out of the diplomatic corps when the conference room door slid open. Dr. Emma Rodriguez walked in, looking like she hadn't slept in a week, which, knowing Emma, was probably accurate. "Sorry I'm late," she said, dropping into the chair next to Jake with a heavy sigh. "I was reviewing the preliminary data we got from the Flufari homeworld." She glanced at Vrex with the kind of expression usually reserved for particularly unimpressive lab specimens. "Counselor, Dr. Rodriguez," Vrex inclined his head slightly. "I trust you're here to discuss the obvious biological incompatibilities between humans and Flafari physiology?" Emma pulled out her own tablet, a sleek human device that made Vrex's clunky alien tech look like a stone tablet. "Actually, I'm here to discuss how remarkably compatible our species are. The Flufari cubs require constant physical contact, emotional support, and frequent feeding. Their brain chemistry responds positively to what you might call pack bonding behaviors." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And that's a problem because?" "It's not a problem," Emma said, turning to give Vrex a pointed look. "In fact, humans are probably the most naturally suited species in the galaxy for this kind of intensive childcare. We're social mammals with strong parental instincts. We form emotional attachments easily, and we're stubborn enough to keep trying when things get difficult." Rex's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, well, there are still the cultural considerations, the proper dietary requirements, the educational standards." "Oh, you mean like making sure they get enough protein, teaching them to play nicely with others, and reading them bedtime stories?" Jake asked innocently. "Yeah, we've never done any of that before." "This is not a joke, Captain Morrison," Vrex hissed. "These creatures require specialized care. Their diet consists of 17 different mineral supplements, carefully balanced according to their individual genetic markers. Their sleep cycles must be regulated to accommodate their unique circadian rhythms. They need constant intellectual stimulation, appropriate to their developmental stage." Emma cleared her throat. "You mean they need good food, regular naps, and age-appropriate activities? Counselor, with all due respect, you're describing basic parenting." Jake leaned back in his chair, watching Vrex's composure start to crack. "Here's what I think is happening. You've convinced yourselves that taking care of kids is some kind of impossible science that only super-advanced alien civilizations could possibly master. But the truth is, you're all just scared of a little responsibility." "How dare you?" Vrex began, but Jake cut him off. "We'll take your tests," he said firmly. "All of them. But when we pass, and we will pass, you're going to hand over those cubs without any more bureaucratic nonsense. Deal?" Vrex stared at him for a long moment, his reptilian eyes unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Captain. But don't expect this to be easy." Jake grinned. "Easy is boring. When do we start?" 2 weeks later, Jake stood on the cargo bay of the Good Intentions, watching 300 Flafari cubs tumble out of the transport ship like the universe's most adorable avalanche. They were exactly as advertised, knee-high balls of golden fur with enormous eyes and tiny chittering voices that somehow managed to sound both alien and heartbreakingly familiar at the same time. "Okay," he said to the assembled crew. So the good news is they're cute enough to cause spontaneous diabetes. The bad news is we have absolutely no idea what we're doing. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a grizzled veteran who'd raised 4 kids of his own, snorted. Sir, with all due respect, they're kids. How different can they be? Famous last words number 2, as it turned out. The first clue that things weren't going to be simple came when the cubs started purring. Not just regular purring, but some kind of harmonic resonance that made the ship's hull vibrate like a tuning fork. Within minutes, half the crew was getting motion sick, and the navigation system was throwing error messages. Emma, Jake called over the increasingly chaotic din, please tell me you have some brilliant scientific solution for this. Dr. Rodriguez, who was crouched down letting a particularly small cub climb all over her, looked up with an expression of scientific fascination mixed with mild panic. They're trying to establish pack harmony through sonic bonding. It's actually quite beautiful from an evolutionary standpoint. It's giving me a migraine from a survival standpoint, Jake replied, wincing as the purring reached a new crescendo. Can we turn it down? I don't think they know how, Emma said, as the cub on her shoulder started grooming her hair with tiny alien paws. They've been separated from their parents for weeks. This is probably their way of trying to feel safe. Meanwhile, Ambassador Glorp, a gelatinous blob of alien smugness, who'd been assigned to observe and document the human childcare experiment, was taking notes on a floating tablet with obvious glee. Fascinating, he burbled, his translucent form rippling with what Jake had learned to recognize as alien amusement. The humans appear to be experiencing immediate auditory distress. Note for the record, day 1, hour 1, already showing signs of inadequacy. Hey Jello boy, Jake called out, unless you've got some actual helpful suggestions, how about you keep your observations to yourself? Glorp's form quivered with indignation. I am a certified xenobiological observer with 17 advanced degrees in interspecies relations. I am merely documenting your inevitable failure for the official record. Right, Jake said, turning his attention back to the cubs. Okay people, new plan. Let's try the human approach. What followed was, by any objective standard, complete chaos. But it was human chaos, which somehow made all the difference. Ensign Peters, fresh out of the academy and clearly overwhelmed, had the brilliant idea of putting on some music to compete with the purring. Within minutes, half the cubs were trying to dance to classic rock, their tiny bodies wiggling in ways that defied both physics and common sense. Lieutenant Commander Williams, a mother of 3, took one look at the situation and started distributing snacks. Not the carefully balanced mineral supplements the Galactic Council had specified, but good old-fashioned human comfort food. Cookies, crackers, and yes, pizza cut into tiny pieces. You can't feed them that, Glor protested, his gelatinous mass practically vibrating with horror. Their digestive systems require precisely calibrated nutrition according to their individual metabolic profiles. The digestive systems require food, Williams shot back, watching as the cubs devoured the pizza with obvious delight. And look, the purring's getting quieter. She was right. As the cubs filled their bellies with earth food, their sonic bonding gradually shifted from earthquake-inducing resonance to something more like a contented hum. Jake watched Chief Martinez fashion a series of blanket forts out of cargo containers, while Ensign Kim started an impromptu game of what appeared to be alien tag. The cubs were laughing now, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. And for the first time since they'd arrived, they actually looked like kids instead of traumatized refugees. This is highly irregular, Glorp observed, his form practically quivering with disapproval. The galactic standards clearly state that interspecies cultural exchange should be managed through careful, controlled interactions. You're just winging it. Yeah, we do that a lot, Jake said, watching one of the smaller cubs figure out how to work a human tablet, somehow instinctively navigating to a video of Earth cats. Turns out kids are kids, no matter what planet they're from. They want to feel safe, they want to play, and they want someone to care about them. But the proper procedures, Glord began. The proper procedures, Jake interrupted, were written by species who were too scared to actually help these kids in the first place. Maybe, just maybe, the fact that we don't have a comprehensive manual is exactly what makes us good at this. Emma appeared at his elbow, a cub nestled in each arm like she'd been born to it. The medical scans are coming back clean, she reported. They're actually healthier than expected. I think they were malnourished before, probably from whatever crisis separated them from their families. Jake looked around the cargo bay, which had been transformed from a sterile loading dock into something that looked suspiciously like the world's most chaotic daycare center. Cubs were playing, eating, napping in piles, and generally doing all the things that happy, healthy kids did everywhere in the universe. "Hey, Glorp," he called out to the increasingly agitated observer, "make sure you get this in your report. Day 1, Hour 3, humans successfully prevent interspecies diplomatic incident through the radical application of common sense and pizza." Glorp's response was a sound that the universal translator rendered as something unprintable, but Jake was pretty sure he got the gist of it. This was going to be fun. 3 months later, Jake was beginning to think they'd actually figured this whole interspecies parenting thing out. The good intentions had been retrofitted into what the crew lovingly called the flying daycare, complete with padded corridors, reinforced play areas, and a cafeteria that served both human comfort food and the closest alien equivalent they could manage. The cubs had settled into routines that would have made any Earth pediatrician proud. They woke up, ate breakfast, attended what Lieutenant Williams had optimistically labeled educational enrichment time, but which mostly consisted of teaching them to play human games, took naps in massive cuddle piles, and generally behaved like the happiest bunch of alien kids in the galaxy. Jake was reviewing the morning reports, which included such gems as Fluffball 7 has learned to operate the replicator and is now addicted to chocolate milk, and the cubs have figured out how to open the maintenance hatches and are using them as a jungle gym, when Emma burst into his ready room looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Jake," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement and what might have been terror, "we need to talk, now." He looked up from his paperwork, immediately recognizing the tone that meant Emma had discovered something that was either going to win them a Nobel Prize or get them all killed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, closing the door behind her and activating the privacy screen. "That's the problem. Jake, I've been running comprehensive medical scans on the cubs for months now, trying to understand their biology, their development patterns, everything. And they're not orphans." She dropped into the chair across from his desk like her legs had given out. "Jake, these cubs have living parents. Recent genetic markers show parental bonding chemicals that are still active. Their stress hormones indicate traumatic separation, not grief. They were taken from their families within the last 6 months. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Emma, are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "The Flafari adults didn't vanish," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were taken, or they're hiding, and the Galactic Council knew." The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the cubs playing in the corridor outside his office, their cheerful chittering a stark contrast to the bombshell Emma had just dropped. "How do you know?" he asked finally. Emma pulled out her tablet, swiping through screens of data that looked like it had taken weeks to compile. "I started noticing inconsistencies in the official reports 3 weeks ago. The timelines didn't match. The Galactic Council claimed the Flufari homeworld went silent 4 months ago, but the cubs' biological markers indicate they were separated from their parents much more recently." She pulled up another screen, this one showing star charts and shipping manifests. "Then I started digging deeper. Jake, there have been reports of Fluffery adults in the Outer Rim territories, sightings, refugee camps, and they're all running from the same thing, which is the Dominion Empire." Emma's expression darkened. "They've been expanding into Fluffery territory for the past year. Not through military conquest, but through what they call economic integration. Basically, they move in, take over the infrastructure, and anyone who objects gets relocated." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. So the Galactic Council knew that the Flafari weren't extinct, they knew the cubs were refugees, and they let us believe we were dealing with orphans? "It gets worse," Emma said, which Jake was beginning to realize was Emma's favorite phrase. "I cross-rephrased the Galactic Council membership with Dominion trade agreements. Jake, half the Council members have exclusive contracts with the Empire. They've been profiting from this expansion." The pieces started clicking together in Jake's mind, forming a picture that made him want to punch something, preferably Counselor Vrex. They couldn't openly support the Dominion taking over Flafari territory without looking like monsters, but they also couldn't risk getting involved in a refugee crisis that might interfere with their business deals. "So they found a convenient solution?" Emma nodded grimly. "Let the humans take the cubs. It gets the kids out of the way, makes the Council look compassionate for finding them homes, and if the humans fail, well, that's just proof that the primitive species shouldn't be meddling in galactic affairs." Jake stood up and started pacing, his mind racing. Those smug, calculating, profit-obsessed... He stopped, turning to face Emma. "How sure are you about this?" "Jake, I have genetic markers." shipping records, communications intercepts, and refugee testimony. The only thing I don't have is a signed confession from Counselor Vrex, and honestly, at this point I'm pretty sure I could get that too. If I tried hard enough. There was a soft knock at the door and one of the cubs peeked in. It was Pip, a particularly small one who'd taken to following Emma around like a golden shadow. The cub chittered something in its native language, which the universal translator rendered as, "Dr. Emma Sad, Pip, help." Emma's expression softened as she picked up the cub, who immediately started the gentle purring that had become the ship's unofficial background noise. "No, Pip, Dr. Emma's not sad. Dr. Emma's angry." Jake watched the interaction, feeling something fierce and protective surge in his chest. These weren't just alien refugees anymore. Over the past 3 months, they'd become his crew's kids. He'd watched Martinez teach them to play poker. He'd seen Williams comfort them through nightmares. He'd personally been climbed on, drooled on, and adopted as a surrogate parent figure by creatures who trusted humans completely. "Emma," he said quietly, "please tell me you have a plan to fix this." She looked up at him, her eyes hard with determination while she cradled Pip against her shoulder. "I have several plans. The question is how far you're willing to go to make things right." "These cubs have been through enough," Jake said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made his crew sit up and pay attention. "If their families are out there, if they're alive and looking for their children, then we're going to find them. I don't care how many galactic treaties we have to break or how many counselors we have to embarrass." Emma smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice expression. "Good, because I've already started working on Operation Fuzzy Reunion." "Operation what now?" "I figured you'd want a name for it," she said, as Pip chittered approvingly. "Besides, if we're going to take on the entire Galactic Council and the Dominion Empire, we might as well have a memorable mission name." Jake looked at the cub in Emma's arms, then at the data scrolling across her tablet, then out the window at the stars that suddenly seemed a lot more hostile than they had an hour ago. "You know what?" he said finally. "I'm in. But we're going to need help." "Already thought of that," Emma grinned. "Turns out we've got 312 very motivated little allies who know exactly what their parents look like." 2 weeks later, Jake found himself standing in the cargo bay addressing what had to be the most unusual military briefing in human history. The assembled crowd consisted of his senior staff, 30 hand-picked crew members, and roughly 100 Flafari cubs who were sitting in neat rows with the kind of serious attention that would have made any drill sergeant proud. "All right, people and cubs," he began, consulting his notes while trying not to smile at the sight of Lieutenant Commander Williams teaching tactical hand signals to a group of fuzzy aliens who barely came up to her knee. "Operation Fuzzy Reunion is officially a go." Chief Martinez raised his hand. "Sir, just to clarify, we're about to commit what technically amounts to multiple acts of interstellar piracy, smuggling, and possibly armed rebellion against the Galactic Council?" "That's correct, Chief." "Outstanding, sir. When do we start?" Jake had to admit, he loved this crew. Emma stepped forward, her tablet displaying a 3-dimensional star chart that looked like a spiderweb of red dots and connecting lines. "Our intelligence network has identified 17 different Dominion holding facilities where Flafari adults are being kept. They're scattered across 4 different star systems, heavily guarded, and officially don't exist." "Sounds like my kind of target," muttered weapons specialist Chen, cracking her knuckles with obvious anticipation. "The good news," Emma continued, "is that the Dominion isn't expecting anyone to come looking. They've been operating under the assumption that the galaxy thinks the Flafari are extinct." One of the cubs, a particularly clever one named Whiskers who'd appointed herself as the unofficial spokesperson for her species, chittered something that the translator rendered as, "Mama and Papa trapped? We help rescue." "That's the plan, Whiskers," Jake said, crouching down to her level. "But we need you to tell us everything you can remember about your parents. What they look like, what their names are, anything that might help us identify them." What followed was perhaps the most heartwarming intelligence-gathering session in military history. The cubs eagerly shared memories, descriptions, even crude drawings scratched on data pads with their tiny claws. Emma's team compiled it all into a comprehensive database, cross-referencing genetic markers and family groups with the efficiency of a computer and the dedication of people who'd spent months changing alien diapers. "Okay," Jake said, once they'd gathered as much information as possible. "Here's how we're going to do this. The Council expects us to play by their rules, follow proper diplomatic channels, and generally behave like good little humans who know their place." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around at the assembled faces, human and alien alike. "We're going to do exactly the opposite." The plan that Emma and her team had devised was, by any reasonable standard, completely insane. It was also brilliantly, uniquely human in its approach. Phase 1 involved what Jake had euphemistically labeled aggressive negotiations with various black market traders, smugglers, and information brokers throughout the Outer Rim territories. It turned out that when you offered to pay triple the going rate in genuine Earth coffee and chocolate, people became remarkably cooperative. Within days, they had detailed maps of Dominion facilities, guard rotations, and even meal schedules. "I have to ask," said Commander Harrison, Jake's second-in-command, "where exactly are we getting the budget for bribing half the criminal underworld?" Emma held up a datapad showing their cargo manifest. "Funny thing about taking care of kids. Turns out Earth's entire snack food industry is considered exotic contraband in most of the galaxy. One case of cookies can buy you a used starship." Phase 2 was where things got creative. Instead of trying to sneak past Dominion security or fight their way through heavily defended facilities, they were going to use the one thing the Empire couldn't possibly account for: the power of really, really annoying bureaucracy. "We're going to file complaints," Jake explained to his increasingly confused senior staff. "Mountains of complaints. Every single Dominion facility, administrator, and guard is about to receive formal diplomatic protests, inspection requests, and permit reviews from something called the Galactic Child Welfare Enforcement Division." "Sir," Lieutenant Parks raised her hand tentatively, "there is no Galactic Child Welfare Enforcement Division." "There is now," Emma said cheerfully. "I created the paperwork this morning. Officially, we're a joint human-alien task force dedicated to ensuring the proper treatment of refugee children throughout the galaxy." Martinez was starting to grin. "So we're going to bureaucracy them to death?" "Better than that," Jake said. "We're going to bureaucracy them into letting us walk right through the front door. See, according to Galactic Treaty 47B, which I'm pretty sure nobody's actually read since it was signed, any organization involved in child welfare has the right to conduct surprise inspections of detention facilities." "And if they refuse to let us in?" asked Chen. Emma's smile turned predatory. "Then they're officially admitting they're holding children in illegal detention, which gives us the legal right to liberate said children by any means necessary." The beauty of the plan was that it attacked the Dominion's greatest weakness: their obsession with appearing legitimate. The Empire had spent decades building a reputation as a lawful, bureaucratic organization that followed proper procedures. They couldn't simply start shooting human diplomats without causing a galaxy-wide incident. Phase 3 was where the Cubs came in. Each rescue team would include several young Flafari who could identify their own family members and provide emotional comfort to traumatized adults who'd been separated from their children for months. "The psychological impact alone should be devastating," Emma explained during one of their planning sessions. "Imagine you're a Dominion guard. You've been told you're holding dangerous criminals, and suddenly a group of human diplomats shows up with a bunch of adorable alien children demanding to see their parents. Plus," added Whiskers, who'd somehow figured out how to work the ship's communication system and had been participating in all their planning meetings, "Cubs know parent smell. Can find mama and papa even in big scary building." Jake had to pause the briefing while his crew collectively melted at the sheer adorableness of that statement. The final phase was pure human stubbornness. Once they'd extracted the Flafari families from Dominion custody, they were going to escort them to a safe haven in human space, and then they were going to make the Galactic Council's complicity in the whole mess very, very public. "We've already prepared a comprehensive report," Emma said, holding up a data storage device. "Every communication intercept, every trade agreement, every piece of evidence we've gathered. It's going out to every major news network, scientific journal, and political organization in the galaxy simultaneously." "And if the Council tries to retaliate?" Harrison asked. Jake's expression hardened. "Let them try. By that point, we'll have 312 very grateful Fluffery families backing us up, plus whatever allies we pick up along the way. Besides, I have a feeling the rest of the galaxy is going to be very interested to learn how their leaders have been conducting business." The briefing wrapped up with assignments being handed out, equipment being distributed, and Cubs being given very serious-sounding special mission roles that mostly involved being adorable and identifying their parents. As the crowd dispersed, Emma lingered behind, watching Jake stare out at the stars with an expression she'd learned to recognize over their years of working together. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "Just thinking about how we got here," he said quietly. 6 months ago, we were just another diplomatic mission, following orders and trying not to cause trouble. Now we're about to take on the entire galactic establishment because some alien kids needed help." Emma joined him at the window, watching the stars wheel by as the good intentions prepared to jump to hyperspace. "You know what the funny thing is? Every other species in the galaxy spent millions of years evolving past their parental instincts. They made themselves more efficient, more logical, more advanced. And it never occurred to them that those instincts might actually be worth keeping. She smiled, watching a group of cubs chase each other down the corridor outside, their cheerful chittering echoing through the ship. Maybe being primitive isn't such a bad thing after all. Jake nodded, feeling something settle in his chest that he'd been carrying around for months without realizing it. They were about to embark on a mission that could end their careers, start a war, or get them all killed. But for the first time since this whole mess began, he felt like they were doing exactly what humans were supposed to do. "All right then," he said, turning away from the window. "Let's go show the galaxy what happens when you mess with our kids." 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the same beige conference room where this whole mess had started, but the atmosphere was decidedly different. For one thing, Counselor Vrex looked like he'd been chewing on something particularly bitter for several days. For another, the room was now filled with 17 different species of reporters, 37 galactic rights activists, and what appeared to be half the diplomatic corps from 3 different star systems. Oh, and about 50 Flafari cubs who were currently engaged in what could only be described as the galaxy's most adorable press conference. "Captain Morrison," Counselor Prime Thexis said, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence in what Jake had learned was the alien equivalent of a stress headache. "Perhaps you could explain to the Council exactly how you managed to liberate 347 Dominion detainees without firing a single shot?" Jake glanced over at Emma, who was sitting at a table covered in datapads, looking insufferably pleased with herself. Next to her, Whiskers was giving what appeared to be a very serious interview to a reporter from the Galactic News Network, gesticulating with tiny paws as she explained the finer points of parent identification through scent recognition. "Well," Jake said, settling back in his chair with a satisfied expression, "it turns out that when you show up at a secret detention facility with proper paperwork, adorable alien children, and about 3,000 formal complaints filed through 17 different bureaucratic channels, most guards just assume you're supposed to be there." The truth was, Operation Fuzzy Reunion had gone better than any of them had dared to hope. The first facility they'd hit, a supposedly secure Dominion processing center in the Kepler system, had practically rolled out the red carpet for them. The administrator, faced with a mountain of official-looking documentation and a group of very determined human diplomats accompanied by cubs chittering Mama Papa at the top of their tiny lungs, had simply opened the doors and asked if they needed any assistance. "The psychological effect was devastating," Emma added helpfully. "Turns out that when you spend months convincing yourself you're housing dangerous criminals, and then a bunch of children show up looking for their parents, it gets a little hard to maintain the fiction." Counselor Vrex finally found his voice. "This is highly irregular. You had no authority to conduct military operations in Dominion space." "Military operations?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Counselor, we conducted entirely peaceful diplomatic missions. We filed the proper paperwork, followed all established protocols, and provided humanitarian aid to refugee families. The fact that the Dominion was holding said families in illegal detention isn't our fault." What Jake didn't mention was that by the 3rd facility, word had gotten out about the Human Liberation Service, and they'd started getting calls from other detention centers asking when they could schedule their own inspections. Apparently, watching videos of joyful family reunions broadcast across the galactic news networks had a profound effect on guard morale. By the time they'd hit the 7th facility, they'd been joined by volunteer ships from 12 different species, all eager to help with the humanitarian mission. The Crystalline Hegemony had donated transport vessels. The Silicon Syndicate had provided supplies. Even the usually aloof Ethereal Collective had sent a delegation to observe this fascinating display of primitive emotional bonding. "The point is," Jake continued, addressing the increasingly uncomfortable council members, "we now have 347 adult Flafari who are very interested in testifying about their experiences in Dominion custody. They have some fascinating stories about the economic agreements that led to their displacement." Across the room, a Flufari adult named Keeper of Small Things was giving an impassioned interview about how Dominion economic integration had involved seizing children and scattering families across multiple star systems. Her cubs, reunited after months of separation, were clinging to her fur while occasionally chiming in with helpful details that made the assembled reporters scribble furiously in their notebooks. Counselor Prime Thexis cleared her throat. "Captain Morrison, I think there may have been some misunderstandings regarding the Council's role in this situation." "Oh, I don't think there were any misunderstandings," Emma said cheerfully. pulling up a holographic display that showed a complex web of financial transactions. "We have very detailed records of exactly who knew what and when. For instance, did you know that Councillor Vreck's personal investment portfolio includes substantial holdings in Dominion extraction companies?" Vrex's scales flushed a color that Jake was pretty sure indicated extreme distress. "That is completely irrelevant to—" "Is it, though?" Jake interrupted. "Because I'm looking at communication logs that show the Council knew the Flafari weren't extinct. You knew they were refugees. You knew their children had been separated from them. And you decided the best solution was to let the humans deal with the kids while you continued profiting from the situation." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Whiskers climbing onto the conference table and chittering something that the translator rendered as "bad, lizard person made family sad. Cubs want apology." Jake had to bite his lip to keep from laughing as 300 pounds of armored reptilian counselor was effectively called out by 30 pounds of indignant alien toddler. "The thing is," Jake continued, standing up and beginning to pace around the conference table, "we've learned some interesting things over the past few months. Turns out there are a lot of species in the galaxy who've been having their own problems with Dominion economic integration. Funny how those problems never seem to make it onto the Council's agenda." Emma helpfully activated another display, this one showing a galactic map dotted with red indicators. 17 different species have reported similar incidents. Families separated, adults relocated, children left behind, and in every case the Galactic Council somehow failed to provide adequate assistance. "But that's all changing now," Jake said, his voice taking on the kind of tone that made diplomatic adversaries sit up and take notice. "See, we've been in touch with representatives from all 17 of those species. Turns out, they're very interested in forming some kind of mutual aid society, a group dedicated to providing humanitarian assistance when the official channels fail to act." Thex's 6 eyes went wide. "Captain Morrison, you're talking about establishing a parallel governmental structure. That would be completely unprecedented." "Would it?" Jake smiled. "Or would it just be a group of species who've decided that taking care of each other's kids is more important than maintaining profitable business relationships with expansionist empires?" The truth was, the Galactic Humanitarian Alliance had been Emma's idea, but it had taken on a life of its own. What had started as a way to protect the rescued Flafari families had evolved into something much larger. Species after species had signed on, all of them united by the simple principle that children shouldn't be pawns in political games. "The Alliance will be headquartered in human space," Emma announced, causing another wave of shocked murmuring from the assembled council members. "We'll be providing refugee assistance, family reunification services, and diplomatic support for any species dealing with forced displacement. And," Jake added with a grin that was definitely not diplomatic, "we'll be maintaining a very comprehensive database of exactly which galactic leaders knew about these situations and chose not to act. Just for historical purposes, of course." Councillor Vrex finally exploded. "This is blackmail, extortion. You cannot simply ignore established governmental authority." "Can't we?" Jake asked innocently. "Councillor, established governmental authority had its chance to help. Instead, you chose to profit from other people's suffering. So we're going with Plan B, taking care of each other despite you, not because of you." As if on cue, Whiskers chittered something that made all the other cubs in the room burst into delighted laughter. The translator rendered it as, "Silly lizard person still thinks he's in charge. Cubs know better." Jake looked around the conference room, taking in the sight of reporters documenting everything, council members squirming in their seats, and happy alien families preparing to return to their restored homeworld. It wasn't exactly how he'd imagined his diplomatic career going, but he had to admit, it felt pretty good. "So, here's what's going to happen," he announced to the room at large. "The Flafari families will be returning to their homeworld, which will now be under Alliance protection. The Dominion's economic integration programs are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into their practices, and the Galactic Council is going to explain to their constituents exactly how they managed to lose moral authority to a species they considered too primitive to deserve a voice." He paused, looking directly at Councillor Vrex. "Unless, of course, the Council would like to join the Alliance and help us do this the right way from now on." The silence stretched for several long moments, broken only by the happy chittering of cubs and the sound of reporters documenting what was arguably the most significant shift in galactic politics in 1,000 years. Finally, Councillor Prime Thexis spoke. "Captain Morrison, the Galactic Council would be honored to discuss joining this humanitarian alliance." Jake nodded, trying to look professional and diplomatic instead of like a man who'd just won the biggest gamble of his career. Outstanding. I'll have Dr. Rodriguez send you the paperwork. Fair warning, though, we actually read our treaties before we sign them. As the formal session broke up and various species began the complex process of negotiating humanity's new role in galactic politics, Jake found himself standing with Emma and about a dozen cubs who'd apparently decided he was the perfect height for climbing practice. "So," Emma said, watching Whiskers attempt to braid his hair with tiny alien fingers, "any regrets about volunteering to take care of some kids?" Jake looked around the room, watching human crew members teaching alien children to play games, former prisoners reuniting with their families, and galactic politicians struggling to adapt to a universe where someone actually cared more about doing the right thing than maintaining the status quo. "You know what?" he said finally. "I think we might have just accidentally solved galactic politics." Accidentally? Okay, fine. I think you might have just accidentally solved galactic politics through the strategic application of aggressive childcare. Emma grinned. "Best diplomatic strategy ever." Jake nodded, gently untangling Whiskers from his hair and settling her on his shoulder where she immediately began purring contentedly. "Besides, someone had to teach the galaxy how to be human. Might as well be us." As the Good Intentions prepared to depart for its new role as flagship of the Galactic Humanitarian Alliance, Jake couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the universe was about to become a much better place to raise kids. All species of kids.